distrust toward Pyongyang is highly irresponsible. It led to the failure of the summit. We should overcome this mistrust against North Korea. The US already made a bold approach by holding summit with North Korea. Now is the time to get tangible results. The conditions for achieving peace on Korean Peninsula are changing. It is very hard, but it's a politician's duty and our politicians' missions to provide a better outcome for all of us. As a politician, as a citizen, we should strive to create a peaceful solution to tension on Korean Peninsula. Cooperation between the South and North and the US is vital for this. Thanks to Representative Brad Sherman for providing us the insight on US perspective today. I am very expect and exciting. I sincerely hope that with a solid ROK-US alliance, we can lead North Korea toward a better future. We can look at the example of Vietnam, for example. As you know, although they are 10 years vigorously the war between the United States and Vietnam, and in 1995, the normalization of the diplomatic relations between the United States and Vietnam. Now is Vietnam very changing. They are also substantial, the military alliance of the United States. They can check and balance China. Even they are same communist country, but it's quite different. Like this, we can imagine North Korea can, like the second Vietnam, they can change the pro-America country and then check and balance, and the Northeast is the equilibrium. So this will provide so many economic and political options for the US and Korea. Let's keep in touch and let's strengthen our interparliamentary and diplomacy to closely cooperate on this issue. I wish the Brad Sherman and all the best the November election, as well as for the upcoming House Foreign Affairs Committee. I hope we will closely cooperate with each other as committee chairs. Thank you.
네, 고맙습니다. So thank you so much, Chairman Tong, for your insightful and encouraging words. I'd like to take a moment now to indulge in a retrospect of some of Kapac's highlights and precious memories with tonight's special guest, the Honorable Congressman Brad Sherman. These are such great memories. I'm really looking forward to a day that we can all join together physically. Thank you so much for sharing those highlights. I'd like to now introduce the 이사장님, Kim Dong-sa, Board Chairman of Kapac, Dr. Chris Kim, who will introduce our special guest this evening.
I'm extremely honored to introduce Honorable Congressman Brad Sherman. He has been working closely with Kapac last 2 years, as you see in the video clip. He was the keynote speaker for the first Kapac forum held in Los Angeles, California last October. Congressman Brad Sherman was born and raised in Southern California and represents California's San Fernando Valley. Congressman Sherman is currently serving his 12th term in Congress and has served in the House of Representatives since 1997. Mr. Sherman received his BA from UCLA, where he graduated summa cum laude. Later, he received his law degree from Harvard, where he graduated magna cum laude. Mr. Sherman worked as a CPA, attorney, and certified tax law specialist. Congressman Sherman currently serves on 3 major House committees. He is a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, and a member of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. In 2019, Mr. Sherman was elected as the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific. This subcommittee also has non-proliferation jurisdiction efforts later in 2019. Mr. Sherman vacated his House Foreign Affairs Asia Subcommittee chairmanship after the Financial Services Committee elected Mr. Sherman to serve as chairman of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets. 2 days ago, Congressman Mr. Sherman announced his bid to chairmanship for the powerful House Foreign Affairs Committee for the next Congress term, as also Mr. President Choi announced. We wish the best wish for you, and we welcome Honorable Congressman Mr. Brad Sherman. He will speak about COVID-19, U.S. election, U.S.-Korean alliance, and peace process in Korean Peninsula. We welcome you, Congressman Brad Sherman.
Congressman, please unmute yourself, or I'll do it.
Unmute. There we go.
Thank you. Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. It is an honor once again to be with Kapac, and I especially want to thank Casey Choi, but all of the leadership of Kapac. And I really enjoyed watching that whole slideshow of all the different events. I've been at so many Kapac events, but this is the first virtual event that I virtually attended. In addition, I want to recognize someone who I think is on later in the program, my good friend, Marilyn Strickland. She was born in Seoul. Her father fought in World War II in Korea, and she is running for Congress from the state of Washington. And if she's elected, as I expect she will be, she'll not only be the first African-American to represent the Washington state in Congress, she will also be the first Korean-American woman ever elected to Congress in the history of the United States. So I look forward to serving with Marilyn Strickland. In over 2 decades of serving in Congress, recently as chair of the Asia Subcommittee, I have fought on behalf of Korean Americans, worked for stronger ties with South Korea, and worked for peace on the Korean Peninsula. There are around 2 million Korean Americans, and I'm proud to say that so many of them have decided to make Los Angeles their home. And I look forward to, I think it's less than 2 years from now, when we can celebrate the opening of the Korean American National Museum. The museum will have a lot of content, because there is so much content in the Korean American contribution to America. Korean Americans are much more likely to graduate college and twice as likely to have a graduate degree as everyone else in America. And I don't have to review with you all of the Korean American leaders in industry, business, and entertainment. And in the public sphere, looking at the many pictures you showed me, several of them include me with Andy Kim, who does such a good job of representing New Jersey. And I understand he's going to be your featured speaker next month. So it's so good to work with Andy Kim and soon Marilyn Strickland as well. On issues involving the Korean War, most Americans, most people in the world think this is a war that ended in 1953, but in fact that was just an armistice. The state of affairs of having just an armistice really doesn't serve anyone. And last July, we were able to get an amendment through the House calling for diplomacy to formally conclude the Korean War. The amendment stated, and unfortunately it did not make it through the Senate, that diplomacy is essential to address the nuclear weapons issue, to avoid military confrontation, and to pursue a credible diplomatic process. Although this is important, was important language, I've now co-sponsored HRES 152, which is a separate bill calling for us to declare the end of the Korean War. One major consequence of the Korean War continues to this day, and that is the separation of families. This has prevented Korean Americans with relatives in North Korea from seeing their families. I don't think most Americans understand that there are over 100,000 Americans with relatives in North Korea. And although there have been 21 family reunions between North Koreans and South Koreans just in the last 2 decades, and obviously there should be far more than that, Korean Americans have not even had a single opportunity to see loved ones in North Korea, not a single one. I'm working in Congress at every opportunity, whether it's dealing with President Trump or President Moon, have asked them to elevate this issue with Kim Jong-un. I've reached out on many occasions to the North Korean UN mission. We had agreed in principle to meet, and then they decided not to. But I think that as we work toward improvements in the relations, that needs to include family reunification visits, family reunion visits involving Korean Americans. As Casey knows, as others knows, in June 2019, I participated in a congressional forum sponsored by Kapac and also Judy Chu and the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus to focus on this very issue. In addition, there are 2 pieces of legislation that I have co-sponsored regarding reunions, the Divided Families Reunification Act and the emerging reunions of Divided Korean American Families Act that Karen Bass, also of our region, has put together. As House Chair of the Asia Subcommittee, I made Korea one of my priorities, a top priority. At my direction, my subcommittee's first 2 hearings were focused on Korea. We had Bill Richardson, who you all know has negotiated in Pyongyang on many occasions on many issues. He is, of course, also the former governor of New Mexico. In September of 2019, we had David Stilwell, the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, who also testified before the subcommittee and addressed the issues of family reunifications or family unification visits, and agreed to push that up to a higher level in our discussions. Obviously, there are many things that the United States and North Korea need to talk about, and we need to talk about these in a serious way. And families, Korean American families, need to be included in that. In addition, and Casey was back for this, I brought together quite a number of members of Congress with Korean business officials to discuss the opening of the Kaesong Industrial Complex. And I believe that when we resolve the nuclear issue, one of the reasons for Kim Jong-un to make an agreement is that I think that would lead to the complex being reopened. In June of 2019, I hosted a meeting with Moon Jung-in, who's Moon Jae-in's special advisor for unification, diplomacy, and national security affairs. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk also about adoptee citizenship. Currently, when a child is adopted by an American citizen and raised here in the United States, they acquire U.S. citizenship. However, there was a period of gap in that law. Today, there are still thousands of individuals who were born in countries like South Korea or other places who were adopted by American families, but did not receive U.S. citizenship. This is the only country they have known. They came here as adopted children, and that's why I'm a strong supporter of the Adoptee Citizenship Act 5233. This legislation would benefit some 35,000 adult adoptees here in the United States. In focusing on the nuclear issue, and I think that is the issue that we have to make substantial progress on in order to deal with the other issues. The constant refrain from the United States is, and even the implied promise from Pyongyang, is what we call CIVIT, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. And that is clearly the best outcome we could have. But I can see reasons why North Korea would not be anxious to go that far. I was there in Congress when North Korea made it plain that they would like to see a non-aggression pact with the United States. And at that point, Vice President Cheney, who was probably more influential in the first term of George W. Bush on foreign policy than was George W. Bush himself, said, hell no, because he dreamed of invading North Korea. And so that is not the policy of this administration or the last administration. It would obviously be an insane policy for our country. But the very fact that it was once that the United States once rejected the idea of a non-aggression pact, and for a host of other reasons, would indicate that perhaps North Korea would retain some limited nuclear weapons, highly verifiable, observable, and limited. That is not what anybody talks about. They just talk about this as if we're going to get everything we want in terms of complete denuclearization of the North. I would like to achieve that. But I think that the situation now of hostility on the one hand and an increase every day in the fissile material in the hands of the North Korean government, an increase in the number of weapons is highly unacceptable. And there are those who think it's a success just to pound the table and say, we're for complete denuclearization. But that policy has led us to many score of nuclear weapons in the North. And at the same time, the people of North Korea suffer both from the costs of building additional nuclear weapons and the cost of the sanctions. And so it doesn't matter whether the President Trump is calling Kim Jong-un a little rocket man in an insulting way, or whether he's praising him in beautiful letters. The fact is, the world grows more dangerous every day that we don't reach a conclusion on this nuclear issue. So we need to be willing to sit down. I know some wonder whether we should have a third summit without preconditions. I don't think that's not the way foreign policy usually works. Normally, you build up to a summit, and at the summit, you ratify a deal that's already been put together by experts, perhaps solving one or two problems at the summit at the very end. So what we need is not theatrics. What we need is serious discussion designed to get us to a point where either North Korea has no nuclear weapons or they have an identified number, highly secured, highly verifiable. And it's got to start with a freeze in the creation of new fissile material. It's important that our efforts to reach agreement with North Korea do not come at the expense of our relationship with South Korea. South Korea is one of our most important partners. We are unified by our political values, our economic ties, our people-to-people ties, exemplified by this organization, and our security interests. There are 28,000 American soldiers standing side by side with their South Korean counterparts at the DMZ, which I had a chance to tour. The troops have helped maintain peace on the peninsula. They've allowed South Korea to become a safe and secure liberal democracy and an economic powerhouse. I oppose the actions of President Trump to unilaterally suspend our cooperation with South Korea or threaten to pull back troops, to pull troops out of South Korea. That is something that could be done in conjunction with South Korea as part of a lessening of tensions, should we be able to put that together. I know some have asked whether there's likely to be a summit before the 2020 election. On July 15th, Secretary Pompeo stated that Trump only wants to engage in a summit if there's a significant likelihood of real progress. Pompeo has said that the U.S. is trying to hold informed discussions and that nuclearization and stability in the area are important. I doubt very much whether Trump would have a summit and take that significant political risk unless he was relatively certain that a deal that would be widely considered in the United States a successful deal would emerge out of that. As to the Biden administration, I expect the Biden administration to take a similar approach to the Obama administration and would probably not meet unless there were some things worked out before the meeting. Biden would also try to push China to push North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. And of course, the United States needs to work to create a trilateral relationship that includes Japan. And obviously, when North Korea and Japan don't get along together, that hurts American security. Turning to the issue of human rights, North Korea does oppress its own people. That's why I've joined with colleagues in introducing the North Korean Human Rights Reauthorization Act and a host of bills designed to help get information to the people of North Korea. We must commit ourselves not only to the health of the people of North Korea, but hopefully someday their freedom as well. As to our relationship with South Korea, I've met regularly and on many occasions with the foreign minister, the ambassador, and of course with the then president when I visited South Korea several years ago. South Korea had the opportunity to show the world its success when it hosted the Winter Olympics, and I had the pleasure of joining my colleagues in co-sponsoring a resolution congratulating South Korea on that achievement. Before the most recent round of diplomacy, the president was threatening a first strike against North Korea without congressional approval. Such a war would have been catastrophic. That's why I joined my colleagues in introducing the No Unconstitutional Strike Against North Korea Act. Obviously, presidents should not be taking us, that we could get involved in a whole constitutional discussion, taking us to war without the approval of Congress. And Congress is not about to approve a unprovoked strike against North Korea, or even a provoked strike against North Korea. We're not here to initiate hostilities. The issue has come up about joint exercises, and I'll probably get a question about that, or I'm getting toward the end of my speech here. I've probably gone a little long, but our security relationship with the United States is not just, quote, in the words of President Trump, we protect wealthy countries for nothing. No, the 28,500 U.S. service members on North Korea are not just about protecting on the Korean Peninsula. The 28,500 U.S. service members on the Korean Peninsula are not there just to protect South Korea. They are a forward presence in U.S. national security. That's why we just passed the National Defense Authorization Bill, which included provisions prohibiting the president from withdrawing troops from Korea without congressional approval. Now, I'll point out that is the House version of the bill. It now goes to the Senate, and the Senate has consistently done the Trump administration's bidding. So we will see whether that provision it emerges in the final legislation. We agree that our allies and partners should contribute. South Korea contributes almost $1 billion a year. It's a little, it would be unusual to be able to convince them, as Trump is trying, to go from 1 billion to 5 billion. Of course, South Korea spends more on its defense as a percentage of its GDP than Japan, way more than Japan, and more than just about any of our European allies. As I've said before, we need to try to work to make sure that Japan is part of Northeast Asian defense, and we want to try to eliminate tensions, but that cannot be done by ignoring history. That's why I was one of the co-sponsors in the bill that went through Congress to recognize the so-called comfort women, actually the imprisoned sex slaves of World War II. And of course, in addition to that poignant obscenity, there was the entire practice of forced labor. So I've got a lot of other things to cover. Hopefully I'll be able to get my other points integrated with answers to questions, because I know I've spoken a little longer than you had allotted me. I want to thank Casey. I want to thank Kapac, and I look forward to answering just a few questions.
Thank you so much, Congressman Sherman. And thank you so much for all the work that you've done on behalf of the Korean community and for advocating for policy priorities that affect our community, both here in the United States as well as on the Korean Peninsula. So we've received some really great questions.
I do want to comment that in my speech, I didn't cover the domestic scene. And so if you have any questions about who's likely to control the Senate or the House, how the presidential race is going, any of those questions, I'd love to deal with those as well. So it's
Sure. Excellent. Well, I'd like to start off with a question. Well, first of all, we received a lot of questions from all throughout the United States as well as Korea. So I'd like to start off right now with a question from attorney Andrew Pak, 변호사 from New York. And he asked this question. So unfortunately, there are widely held misconceptions that President Trump and the Republican Party have been more actively engaged in peace talks with North Korea in comparison to President Obama and the Democratic Party's strategic patience policy towards North Korea. So the question is, if Vice President Joe Biden is elected, would he be ready, willing, and able to engage in the peace process in the Korean Peninsula, including direct talks with Kim Jong-un?
I think President Trump has been flamboyant, both with tirades and bellicose statements, and with incredibly friendly, almost fawning statements, and it has all led to nothing. The sanctions are there, the fissile material increases. What we need is a more serious approach, and I think that will come by having experts meet and discuss the question, and if there's a deal to be made, the parties are getting close together, that's when you do the summit meeting. Doing a summit meeting that leads to nothing actually is a step backward, because everybody has their hopes with the summit meeting and then nothing happens. That being said, I'm a voice to say, let's try to reach a deal that conceivably could be reached, rather than this belief that North Korea is going to go from a system now where they're creating more and more nuclear weapons every day, where they're developing their technology to deliver those weapons every day. To think that we're going to go from that to absolutely nothing would be great, but we should be prepared to settle for less. And as long as you tell the American people that your policy is going to achieve everything, you're probably not going to achieve anything. So we need a president that sets reasonable objectives that can be achieved, and a serious effort at the State Department to achieve those. And then let's face it, we also have to worry about what Pyongyang is saying. No matter what administration you have here, if Kim Jong-un doesn't want to reach a deal, if he thinks his internal power is somehow threatened by reaching a deal, then nobody's going to be able to reach a deal. But I think that the Obama administration could have put a little bit more attention on North Korea, but attention doesn't necessarily get you results. And you can't have more attention than Hanoi and Singapore, and we still don't have any results. So attention is good, but it's not a substitute for hard diplomatic work and reasonable positions on both sides.
Excellent. Well, Dr. PhD of International Relations, Antae-hyung Baksa from Cypress, California, here in Orange County, wanted to know that, well, first of all, you announced on Wednesday your bid to chair the House Foreign Affairs Committee in a letter to Democratic lawmakers asking for support. So if chosen, what would you do for a successful peace process on the Korean Peninsula, including the denuclearization and peace regime on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, thank you for bringing up my efforts to become chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I've served for 24 years, longer than anyone else who will be serving Congress next year. The current chairman is leaving Congress. And for 17 years, I have chaired or been the chief Democrat when we're in the minority of one of the subcommittees. I've served on every subcommittee, especially the Asia subcommittee, which I chaired until recently. If I am chair, I think that we need a delegation to go to South Korea, and if welcomed by the North, to North Korea as well. Now, it's not always easy to persuade the North Koreans to accept a congressional delegation. It's very rare. We need to focus attention on the importance of the United States adopting a reasonable bargaining position and deploying the top diplomats in order to reach out to North Korea and try to establish peace on that basis. I think that anything is better than the continuation of what we have now, which is the fastest possible increase in fissile material and the toughest sanctions that we've ever had. That combination should not be continued.
Great. Professor Tong Kim Tong 교수님 from Washington, D.C. Has actually a multi-part question. And just to kind of give an overview, Professor Kim spent his career with the U.S. State Department, where he was the interpreter for 4 U.S. presidents from Reagan to George W. Bush, and participated in all rounds of negotiations with North Korea up until his retirement, until 2005. And so I'm just going to go and ask the various questions. So hope, just in an effort to save time here. But first of all, I'm going to go through the questions and then you can rapid answer. So in 2015, you issued an important statement that must have helped ease tensions with North Korea following Trump's talk of fire and fury. You then said, while denuclearization is not easy, we should work to get a freeze on the North Korea nuclear program, utilizing China's cooperation. Do you still believe we need China's help? And if you do, how would the current deterioration of U.S. relations with China affect U.S. denuclearization efforts? But before you answer that, hold on. Number 2.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the House just passed a new Defense Authorization Act requiring the administration to meet certain conditions should it decide to withdraw troops from Korea or cut the level of troops below 28,500. So what if President Trump decides to pull out troops anyway? Will this become another issue for the Supreme Court to settle? And lastly, the idea of denuclearization to end the state of war in Korea has some positive points of argument for the mitigation of tensions and possibly for the facilitation of North Korean denuclearization. It could open the path to opportunity for discussion of a peace regime in Korea. So, however, such a declaration or any agreement by one administration will be meaningless if it's discarded by the next generation. So what's the likelihood of dealing with an end of war declaration in one form of a treaty for Senate ratification? So I'll leave that up to you.
3 tough questions. First, yes. Our position with China is not one of there being an enemy. With an enemy, it's a zero-sum game. Anything that helps them hurts us just because it helps them. And we're not in that circumstance. We are rivals ideologically and economically and geopolitically. But the fact is that if China wasn't cooperating in the sanctions, there'd be no sanction. China is cooperating to a degree with the United States, and it can play an important role either by pushing North Korea to take a more reasonable position, just as a lot of us are pushing the US to take a more reasonable position, and second, in the sense of verification, because I don't think that after all these years of hostility that North Korea would allow Americans to engage in the inspections, all the inspections that would be necessary. So I think there'd be some inspections by the IAEA and some inspections by China. And the fact is that China doesn't particularly fear North Korean nuclear weapons, but has no particular reason to favor them either. And so I think that there's a role for China both in pushing North Korea to the bargaining table, and they're in effect doing that every day that they adhere to UN sanctions, and that there's a role for China to play in the verification process, knowing that we're not, I don't think the United States will have its folks just roaming over North Korea, looking under every rock to see if there's a nuclear weapon. As to the constitutional issue, yes, indeed, there would be a constitutional issue, but only if first we're able to get this bill in its present form through the Senate. And as I pointed out, the Republican-held Senate has done the president's bidding, and it will be difficult to get this provision through the Senate. And there will be a lot of negotiations on this. This is a huge bill. And the second thing would be if the president decided to defy this. And the third would be that all would happen while Trump was president, which would only really realistically occur if Trump was reelected, heaven forbid. So I don't think we're going to have a constitutional crisis on this just because of the practicalities and the timing. Finally, if there was just a peace treaty that ended the war and did accomplish nothing else, I'm not sure you could get that through the Senate. But if it was part of a deal that reduced, limited in a verifiable way, and froze the North Korean nuclear program, then I think you could get a 2/3 ratification in the Senate. And as a backup there, instead of a treaty, you could have a executive legislative agreement with a 50% vote in both the House and the Senate. So I do think that you can get the kind of buy-in that you didn't get with the Iran nuclear deal, which was never accepted by either House or the Senate, or the Paris Climate Accords, which were never accepted by either the House or the Senate. Although I guess today's House of Representatives would approve if it was submitted by the president, but he, of course, is pulled out. So I think that a deal that increased American security would get congressional buy-in. So there's 3 answers to 3 questions.
Thank you. So the next one will be pretty easy, I hope. It's a short question from reporter Kim Gi-soo Gija from Nail Shinmun newspaper in Korea. So do you think that just before the presidential election, there's a possibility of a U.S.-North Korea summit in October? And if that happens, what levels of agreement can we expect?
I think it's highly unlikely that there will be a summit. A summit will take place only if Trump is very confident that he can get a deal that will be applauded pretty much across the board in the United States. It is the North Koreans are tough negotiators, and the American people would be skeptical of a deal entered 30 days before an election. So a deal that might be good might be viewed as not so good if it would be just because the public would be so skeptical. So for Trump to have such a summit, he would have to be assured, which is unlikely with North Korea, of getting a deal that was so good that even Democrats would have to say it's good, even when Democrats don't want to give him credit because it's 30 days before an election. So we all dream of, we all dream of peace, but I think that October 2020 is not a particularly auspicious month to achieve the peace. If, on the other hand, Pyongyang thinks that Trump is somehow much better to do business with, maybe the impending election is something that causes them to change their bargaining position. But I'm not seeing signs of that. And while we all long for peace, a summit that doesn't move us toward peace, if anything, is a little step backward.
Thank you so much. This next question comes from Professor 한문수 교수님 from Boston, Massachusetts, who wants to know, this is a quasi multi-part question as well.
Oh, another one.
Yes. Do you recognize the campaign for humanitarian support to North Korea from Kapac and other humanitarian aid organizations? And if so, what kind of support would you be able to provide as chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee? And secondly, what are your thoughts on the urgent necessity of the official end of the Korean War, such as introduced by Congressman Ro Khanna in HR 152, in maybe the establishment of a liaison office in Pyongyang and Washington, D.C. for mutual trust building? And lastly, what do you want and expect from Korean Americans within the United States and in this community to do?
Well, we haven't talked about COVID yet, but it obviously hangs over everything. And I want to applaud Kapac for working to get PPE to North Korea. We may not know exactly how much North Korea is affected by COVID, but no country has been completely spared, and that PPE could be very helpful. I think the most important thing, the next step will be vaccines, and it's quite possible that the vaccine will be developed by an American company. Knowing the American people, they'll insist that we get it all first, but we should be providing the vaccine to the entire world, and perhaps we can do that at even below cost for poor countries. Then what was the second question again?
So the second question was around your thoughts on the necessity of ending the official end of the Korean War, HR 152, right. And other things such as that with the peace declarations and the establishment of a liaison office in Pyongyang.
I think a liaison office would be a good idea. North Korea already has an office in the United States in the United Nations, and therefore would gain a little bit by having a liaison office here in Washington. We would gain more by having a liaison office in Pyongyang. I, of course, join with Ro Khanna in sponsoring that HR 152 to end the war. But as I've said, to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate on that, it would have to be part of a bigger security package. And I think Korean Americans, you mentioned should be actively involved in the politics and the civic fiber of the United States. I, especially earlier in my remarks, applauded Andy Kim and Marilyn Strickland, two Korean Americans who are very active.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question comes from 이사장님, the board chairman, Dr. Chris Kim from Riverside, California. And he wants to know, the daily coronavirus infection rate in the US is rising, with 1 million new cases reported in the last 2 weeks. And a public health expert to CNN said that we've basically rolled back 2 months worth of progress. And people have been complaining that we have an utter lack of leadership here in this country. And so the question is, do you think the coronavirus situation in US will have an impact on the presidential campaign elections in the US? And if you were the top leader of this country, what would you do to stop the virus?
Wear a mask. I'm not wearing a mask now because I'm in my den, but I wear a mask wherever I'm outside my front door. The president has finally said he's in favor of masks, though he's not in favor of requiring masks. He's embraced this lunatic notion that government can't tell you what to wear. Well, last I checked, if you walk out of your house without wearing clothing, the government will indeed intervene. So if the government can make you wear clothing, it should certainly be able to cause you to wear a mask in a pandemic. And you look, China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, people wore masks, and they're both all dealing with the disease relatively well. You can criticize what China did in December, January, and early February, but the fact is, as far as protecting their own people, they've got a lot less of the disease. And the other countries I identified, people wore masks, and just by wearing masks and doing a few other basic things, the key is to, and the doctor will understand this, reduce the R to below 1. Right now, it's my understanding that the average American who gets this disease will, before they're cured and don't have it anymore, infect roughly 2.2 other people. So then the disease is more than doubling with each generation. If you can reduce that 2.2, not down to 0, but just down to 0.95, that means each person who gets the disease is infecting less than one other person, and so it's spiraling downward. And just wearing masks with a good 90-95% compliance might be enough to achieve that. We also have not spent the money we should have, and both parties are to blame for this, doing research. There are so many questions I've asked about this disease that I could understand why I didn't get answers in February. But one question is, you've got the shields and you've got the masks, those plastic shields versus the masks. Which work better? Should you use them both? Is one enough? Which one works better? We haven't done the research on that. We're guessing. And there are like 50 other questions about how this disease behaves, how it's transmitted, that we didn't know in January, and we're still not researching in July. We have spent less than 0.25% of all the money we've spent on COVID doing research. Now, we've spent some pretty good money on testing, and we recently spent some money on vaccine. But as far as researching the nature of the disease and researching therapeutics, less than 0.25%. And do I think this will affect the election? Absolutely. In fact, Trump's approval ratings were very stable, and he was within a few points of beating Biden. And that was true even in January and February. But by May, people had realized that this was a president who was not coming to grips with this pandemic, who was saying silly things like, it's just going to go away. And you don't need to wear a mask. And he's not going to wear a mask. And that attitude has really hurt his approval ratings, really hurt him in the polls. And I don't think there's a way for him to dig out of it. And you can make arguments as to keeping the society going versus keeping everybody safe. And we have to balance those two things. But not wearing a mask, that doesn't balance the two things. That just ignores the importance of the disease. So I was the first to wear a mask presiding over the House of Representatives. I've done everything possible to model good behavior. And I think that we need to take the disease seriously. We also need to take seriously the economic effects of the shutdown, which is also killing people. But you don't get a diagnosis like that. If you die of COVID, that's what it says on your death certificate. If you die of depression, suicide, or misuse of opioids, COVID may be the economic shutdown may be an underlying cause. So this disease is hurting us both ways, and we ought to have a national leader who believes in masks.
Thank you so much. Yes, no shirt, no shoes, no service. So, but yet,
Right.
we don't have that for masks. So I totally agree with you there, Congressman. And we have one last question for you.
And by the way, on the floor of the House of Representatives, you get kicked out if you don't have a tie and a coat. And yet I got colleagues without masks. I'll let them take off their tie and their coat. That's fine with me.
Just put on a mask.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And so I wanted to give our next question. I wanted to give him an opportunity to speak with you directly, Congressman. And we have here former president of Korea National Institute for National Unification, Professor Emeritus of Eastern Kentucky University, and Kapac's executive advisor, Dr. Kwak Taehwan 박사님, based out of Los Angeles. 박사님, why don't you ask your question?
Okay, thank you. How long I have to talk?
Just ask your question.
We still have about 15 minutes or so. But anyway, thank you very much, Madam Chair Tammy Kim. You have done excellent job today. I like to take this opportunity to say my favorite National Assemblyman Chairman 송영길 의원님 안녕, and also my dear friend from Washington D.C. Tom Kim, where you at, and also the chapter president Edward Gu. Where are you? I haven't seen you. I know you are here. Okay, thank you. Now I have the two-part question regarding U.S.-China rivalry and its impact on Korean peace process. Listening to your presentation tonight, I have learned a lot about your contribution to Korean peace process. I personally would like to express my sincere thanks to your contribution to the Korean peace process. The best. Thank you again. My first part, China has played an essential role in resolving the Korean Peninsula issues such as South-North relations, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and the peace regime building on the peninsula. The current US-China hegemonic competition is not conducive to the Korean peace process. As you said, China is a major enemy of the United States. In this environment, you cannot expect any cooperation from China in order to build a peace regime on the peninsula. Friendly relations between Washington and Beijing will significantly contribute to resolving the Korean issues. However, this year, in 2020, we cannot expect such good relationship between two countries. Now, my question is, do you have any suggestions when you become chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for improving Washington and Beijing hostile relationship? Now, that was my first part.
Well, why don't I answer that part of it first?
Okay.
First, I think you may have misstated or misconstrued my statements. I said that we are not absolute enemies with China. We cooperate on a host of things. The sanctions on North Korea would be meaningless if China did not follow them to some degree, or to a pretty good degree. We buy billions of goods from China every year. They buy billions from us. It may be every one of those is a cooperation. As to my chairmanship, you said when. I'm going to have to say if. I have two opponents in this. It's not like they just hand me the chairmanship. It's not like the old days where you're just the most senior, so they give it to you. It's a contest. As you point out, better relations between the United States and China will help resolve issues on the Korean Peninsula. But another way to look at it from Beijing or Washington standpoint is progress on the Korean Peninsula, working cooperatively and successfully on that, will make relations better between the United States and China and allow us to deal with other issues. As to working toward a better relationship with China, I'm a dove, probably the most prominent dove when it comes to the maritime issues. If the Chinese Navy were to be sailing again and again, just 12.0 miles off the coast of Los Angeles, yes, I would find that annoying.
Right.
And was legally correct. It's annoying. And the islets that China is building in the South China Sea are a problem, but we don't have to make them a cause belli, a reason to go to war. Where the hawks here in Washington will say, but those islets are close to $2 trillion in trade. And that's true. That's all trade in and out of Chinese ports. So if the Chinese were able to militarize these islets, and they shouldn't do it, but if they were able to do it, they would be able to blockade their own ports.
Right.
I'm not sure that's, and you should be aware, putting this in a world context, there are over 30 maritime disputes around the world that don't involve China, right, and that the United States doesn't get involved in, and it tries not to get involved in, right, doesn't get involved in, and that's why you don't know about it. Right. And so we do not have to make China's wrongful islet rock grabbing, right, a reason to build another aircraft carrier group a reason to see how close our naval ships can get to their naval ships or their claimed islands or whatever.
Right.
This has got to be something where we stay by our principles, we respect the law of the sea, we respect the maritime rights, but we don't have to be poking our finger in China's eye about this all the time. This is just something we're going to need to disagree on, but with lower tensions. So there is a way to lower tensions with China on the one area where it gets military.
Right.
I think China should realize that if they can be helpful in working out peace on the Korean Peninsula, that will go a long way, both to helping their security. God forbid there is any violence emanating from North Korea. China's in the immediate neighborhood. It's just not good. It's not good for anybody. So it's in their interest, but it's also in their interest in terms of building a relationship with the United States.
Right.
These are the two biggest economies in the world, two countries that are the two most powerful in the world. This is a relationship that needs to be managed, and anything either side can do that may be in its own interest a bit, but is also helpful to the other side, will help the whole world manage a relationship that's going to be difficult to manage this whole century.
Right.
So that's the answer to the first part of your question.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Congressman Sherman. I sincerely apologize for my misunderstanding of your statement. Okay, let's move to the second part. Beijing and Washington need to separate, I argue separate, Korean issue from bilateral issues between two. The US and China do have common goal of building peace regime on the peninsula. To be specific, I want to take only one example. Beijing has officially declared the signing of the peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula among the four concerned parties, namely, as you know, the United States, China, and two Koreas. The four-party peace treaty replacing 67-year-old Korean armistice agreement will be foundation for building a permanent peace system on the peninsula. This is my question, do you agree with the four-party peace treaty proposal instead of signing treaty between US and North Korea?
Oh, I think it's...
If so, why? If not, why not? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Well, certainly a four-party makes a lot more sense, and there were in the Korean War many other parties or those who contributed to the UN side. Even if there were more than four parties, but these are the four main parties that should put together a deal. If anybody else wants to give approval, that's fine too. I've supported an end to the war, and the best way to end a war is to have the four belligerents all sign a treaty. As I pointed out, the U.S. Constitution would say that the treaty can't be ratified without 2/3 of the Senate, and I'm looking at the Senate as it exists today. I'm not sure that you'd get ratification without it being part of a broader deal. But even if the treaty was signed by four parties and ratified by only three, it would have a significant impact. And I would like to see a formal end to the Korean War. That being said, I'm hoping that we can go beyond ending the war of 1953. I would like to deal with the problems that we face now as well. So yes, there ought to be a four-party treaty, and if it's combined with other good things, that's even better.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And thank you so much for, there were a lot of questions and they were very difficult questions. So we really appreciate you graciously answering so many questions from our community members. And I just want to give it over now to Mina Kim, who will have.
Please, please, when she's on later, give my greetings to Marilyn Strickland. And I look forward to serving with her. And I want to thank Kapac for the relationship that we've established through so many in-person meetings, as shown in the pictures that we began with, and now with this virtual meeting. I see, and I don't really understand it. I'm not a master of the technology. A few individuals have chatted me, and I see something in the upper. If you want to correspond with me, just send a note to congressmanbradSherman@gmail.com. And if you chatted through the Zoom system and I didn't respond, that's not because I don't appreciate you. It's because I don't appreciate the technology.
Good point. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Yeah.
So Mina Kim, I'm gonna give it to you now for some announcements.
Okay, so now we have 2 more sessions left. We are going to have a guest speaker, Kim Kyung-hyuk, National Assemblyman of the Republic of Korea, next Friday on July 31st. And Andy Kim, House and Mid-Service Committee National Security Experts on the following Friday on August 7th. So it's 5 p.m. This is it. I will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as Congressman Sherman announced, we have here a guest, Marilyn Strickland. She's running for Congress in Washington State. So right now, if you are in Washington State or if you know anyone in Washington State, 지금은 예비선거. So there's a primary right now. So look at your mail-in ballots and be sure to check off Marilyn Strickland. So I'm going to give her just an opportunity just to say a few words. Thank you for joining, Marilyn.
메릴린 열어줄래요?
Oh, we got to unmute you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to Congressman Sherman for all of your work that you've done here, both in the United States and to try to create peace abroad on the Korean Peninsula. This means so much to our.
안 나오지 얼굴이?
Now, when
Okay, that's good.
All right. So when I think about the opportunity to serve Congress, it's really about representation. I am the former 2-term mayor of Tacoma, and I was born in Korea. So some of you may not know my personal story, so I want to share it with you very briefly. So my father, an African-American man, joined the army when he was a young man, and he joined the army that was segregated. He fought in 2 wars, and he fought for and loved a country that did not always love him back, but he always taught me the value of treating people with respect and dignity and working hard. Now, when he was stationed in Korea after the war, he met my mother, In-min Kim. And my mother's story is spectacular because it often tells a part of history that a lot of people in the US do not know. She grew up during the colonialization of Korea by Japan. She lived through a war, met my father, and moved here with him, with me, her daughter, to a strange new country. And when my parents came to the United States with me as an infant, 1.5 years old, we landed in Virginia in the 1960s, where it was illegal for them to be married to each other. Years later, we ended up here in Tacoma, Washington. I grew up in this community and eventually became its mayor for 2 terms. And after that, I served at the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce for 2 years as their CEO. Running for Congress is something that I take very seriously because it's about doing the work to help the people I will represent. And I talk often about the opportunity to make history, which is incredibly important. Right now in Congress, Andy Kim is the only Korean American, and I will be honored to join him. So now there will be two of us. And as mentioned earlier, I will be the first Korean American woman to serve in Congress in US history. And I take that responsibility very seriously. I will always put the needs of my district here in Washington State first, with an understanding that as a Pacific Northwest city, we are dependent on our international relations with our partners across the ocean, and Korea is one of them. There is a fairly large Korean American population here in this region. It is one of the largest on the West Coast. And I also understand that this is even bigger than me. I've talked to folks in Los Angeles who are interested in my candidacy. And the topic today about relations between the US and Korea could not be more timely. As we think about coming out of COVID, there are two things that we know for sure. South Korea put on a clinic of how you manage a pandemic. And it's because they had to manage SARS and they had built the infrastructure. So they did the testing. They did the contact tracing where they reached out to people to say, I think you were exposed. They managed to contain it in a very, very intentional way in an area that is very densely populated compared to many cities in the US. I also understand the importance of peace on the peninsula. Congressman Sherman was right. It is time to officially declare the end of this war. But I will tell you that one of the challenges we have here in the US is that a lot of people in the United States simply do not know the history of Korea. They just don't know it. They don't understand the occupation. They don't understand why there was a war. They don't even understand why the 38th parallel was created so that there's a division and what happened. They do not understand the outsized role that China plays with North Korea. So when elected to Congress, because I think positively, my promise to you is this: I will work on behalf of all the people I represent, but especially because of who I am and where I come from, for the Korean American community, in education and economic development, in business, and also doing the things that we can do to ensure that our relationships with our families across the ocean are intact. I am thrilled at the idea of signing on to a resolution that will end the war officially. I am thrilled at the idea of leading a delegation to South Korea so we can learn more about the peninsula and educate our colleagues in Congress and people in the community. And I'm thrilled at the idea of unifying families so that we can think about the relationships that have existed for a long time. Denuclearization of the peninsula is going to be a long, hard road. But my default position when it comes to dealing with foreign relations is always err on the side of humanitarian aid first. What do the people need in North Korea? What can we do to help make their lives better and more prosperous? Because when people feel peaceful, they're more likely to want to cooperate with you. Now, we know that the government there has its challenges, and for decades, we feel like we're trying to make progress and it doesn't happen. But I promise you this, I will work hard every day to learn as much as I can with the goal of peace on the peninsula. I know it won't be easy, but that will be what I strive to do every day, because whether you are on the north side of 38 or the south side of 38, at one time, Korea was a very dynamic country, and it can be that again, with the industrial north and natural resources and the modern technology in the south. A lot of people don't understand that when my mother came here and then sent for all of her family, one by one, in the 70s and 80s, they were escaping a dictatorship government. They wanted a better life here. And for a lot of people who fought in the war in Korea, when they see what it looks like today, they cannot believe the rapid pace of technology and modernization that they see today. So I think about the pride I feel, but I think about the opportunity as well. And I tell people that I will always be a daughter of Korea, but I'm a proud American woman who worked for everybody, but especially my motherland. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marilyn, for joining us. And we, again, if you're in Washington State, if you know anyone in Washington State, please encourage everyone to vote for her. She needs to make it through the primary. So thank you so much. In addition, we do have
Can I try just a bit?
Yes.
Look, whether you live in Washington State or
Oh, you're
not,
still here. Thank you. Yes.
I'm still here because I
Yeah,
was very
thank
impressed with what Marilyn had to say. Look, I know something about politics. This, I believe that the primary is in just a few weeks.
Yes.
And whoever wins that primary is going to be serving in Congress pretty much as long as she wants to. And she's going to be making laws that affect everyone in the United States and working on foreign policy issues that affect the whole world. So you don't have to live in Tacoma to care whether she wins. And that's why you need to go to her website where you can read more about her campaign. And I believe there's a donate button somewhere on that website. So you can click on that if you want to. You can read up about her. Marilyn, what is that website?
That website is stricklandforwashington.com. And if you go into the chat area, we have created a link right here that says Secure Act Blue, so you can donate right away. And thank you, Congressman, for raising this issue.
And you say Strickland for Washington. Is that the number 4 or FOR?
It's Strickland for Washington, all spelled out. So stricklandforwashington.com. And then also, to your point, in Washington State, we have all mail-in ballots. So the ballots have already dropped, and people are voting now. If you can donate as much as you can today, we can run TV ads more often and reach more voters. And so I appreciate your support, and I look forward to working with.
Yeah, man, I want to be serious. If you win this primary, you will be in Congress helping achieve the goals that we share year after year after year. And it's all going to be decided in the next couple of weeks.
All right.
Good.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, everyone, for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to also introduce a couple of other candidates who are here with us, obviously in addition to myself, but we have Fred Jung from Fullerton who has joined us. So if you live in District 1, please vote for Fred Jung. We also have here someone who is a very close personal friend of mine, Dave Min. Dave Min is running for state senate. 상원 의원 California 후보. So Dave Min 교수님, he has been working tirelessly. He made it past the primary, and he will be the highest ranking Korean American in the California state legislature. He will be the only Korean American in the state senate. So we have the highest population of Korean Americans in the United States. And it's actually very sad that we don't have any Korean Americans in the state senate. So welcome, and thank you so much, Dave Min, for joining. And Dave, just say hi, and where can we find more information about you? Okay, so Dave Min, I think he was on here, but at any rate, thank you so much for coming on and for joining us.
I was muted. Yeah. So you can learn more about me at davemin.com. And if elected, I'd be the second Korean American ever in the state senate, and the first since 1978. So great to hear from you, future Congresswoman Strickland, and great to see you, Congressman Sherman. Please support us. We can use it, and we know California's got to lead the way going forward. 감사합니다.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it off to 대표님 right now to recognize some other distinguished guests we have before we close out.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, today's virtual event turned out to be very much successful. I'm so surprised to see my tech guy, Eun-ho Jung, just told me we have more than 250 people joined this event. Amazing and awesome. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for joining us, and let me recognize some distinguished guests before we go. But I should say sorry, there are so many figures joining us today, so I'll just go by the screen order. All right? Okay, first of all, Congressman Sherman just left, it looks like. Thank you so much for joining us. For 송영길 의원님, please shake your hand. Yeah. So everybody just raise your hand and shake your hand. 송영길 의원님 환영합니다. 곽태환 교수님, 크리스동 이사장님, 조셉 이윤 from Calgary, 정승덕 회장님 from San Francisco, 이진희 부회장님 from San Francisco, 김기수 기자님 from Seoul, Korea, 이혜정 부회장님 LA, 김동영 교수님 워싱턴 DC, 이내훈 상임 위원님 LA, 조나다 김 목사님 LA, 오은영 고문님 LA, sorry, Daniel Peck. I should mention this. There are so many young generation joining today from San Francisco and Boston. I'm so happy to see you guys, and hopefully you enjoy today's event, and please join again and again. And LA 총영사관 김병수 정무영사님, 보스턴 김성혁 부회장님, LA 이원익 선생님, 미나 김 부총무님, 이근옥 샌프란시스코 부회장님, Marilyn Strickland, thank you. 그레이스님, 감사합니다. Rachel Beck, thank you. 엘리자 김, 김명균 회장님, 감사합니다. 엔젤, 강주현님, 감사합니다. 정영근님, 감사합니다. 박신아 목사님, 감사합니다. 아이린 강, 감사합니다. 샌프란시스코 주니어, thank you so much. 승강 선생님, 감사합니다. 조슈아 킴, thank you so much. 이경국 선생님, 이병국, 신충우 선생님, 데니얼 설, 태훈 킴, 그리고 김기정 노스캐롤라이나에서 김기정 우리 선생님, thank you. 정현옥 부회장님, thank you. 멀리서 우리 동남아 호치민에서 박남종 회장님 들어오셨네요. 감사합니다. 오이찬 학생, 감사합니다. 데니얼 송, thank you so much. 오케이. 그리고 우리 고문님, 이진훈 고문님, 감사합니다. 그리고 이종미 영사님, 감사합니다. 동포재단, 감사합니다. 지육양, 감사합니다. 송 선생님, 감사합니다. 김아란 선생님, 감사합니다. 우리 보스턴 평통회 정말 너무도 열심히 하시는 한선우 평통회장님, 감사합니다. 전신영 선생님, 감사합니다. 이명은 우리 위원장님, 감사합니다. 박유환 LA 평통 부회장님, 감사합니다. 어이구, 굉장히 우리 중요하신 우리 한국의 성공의 에피스코펄 처치 포머 치프이셨던 김근상 성공의 대주교님 들어오셨네요. 감사합니다. 에리너 강, thank you so much. 한문수 교수님, 감사합니다. 오늘 질문 너무 감사합니다. 이만희 위원장님, 감사합니다. 개성공단 기업협회, 우리 개성공단이 빨리 열려야 되는데요. 작년에 워싱턴 DC에 개성공단 그 설명에 먼 길 하셨는데 우리 브레셔먼 의원, 앤디 킴 많은 의원들이 같이 협조해 주셨는데 아직 열리지 않았지만 곧 열릴 거라고 믿고요. 감사합니다. 헤이한 선생님, 감사합니다. 최성우 샌프란시스코 평통회장님, 감사합니다. 오늘 주니어 우리 평통위원들 많이 이렇게 조인하게 해주셔서 너무 감사합니다. 미야, 감사합니다. 베나 킴 한센, 땡큐. 김성혁 부회장님, 감사합니다. 우리 자랑스러운 K팩 수석 부회장님, 이승우 변호사님, 감사합니다. 강태환 우리 부회장님, 감사합니다. 우리 박성계, 시애틀 늘푸른 연대 박성계 우리 위원장님, 감사합니다. 우리 플러턴 시의원 후보 프레드 정 우리 후보님, 감사합니다. 또 데이빗 LA 캘리포니아 상원의원 후보 데이빗 민 어바인 유니버시티 어바인 법대 교수님, 감사합니다. 우리 박갑식 K팩 위원장님, 감사합니다. 앤드류 올레베커, thank you so much. 그리고 누엔조 선생님 감사합니다. 양승희 선생님, thank you so much. 유연경 선생님, 그리고 션염, 에릭 오 선생님, 크리스티 은주 감사합니다. 그리고 우리 멀리 뉴욕에서 김도영 원장님 감사합니다. 그리고 쉐바 오 선생님 감사합니다. 조나단 리, 그리고 토론토에서 멀리 켈리 리 오마이뉴스 특파원 감사합니다. 거의 마무리돼. 오늘 뭐 거의 250명 중에 지금 많이 떠나셨는데 120분 제가 마지막까지 소개를 하겠습니다. 배국희 대한민국민회 전 이사장님 감사합니다. 우리 개성공단 기업회계 김학건 우리 고문님 감사합니다. 세야타임즈 감사하고요. 우리 김기수 부장님 감사하고요. 그리고 조세 트린달 땡큐. 그리고 멀리 또 그 스페인 마드리드에서 우리 이진우 사장님이 들어오셨네요. 감사합니다. 연팍 선생님 감사하고요. 그리고 구은이 그 샌디에고 평통협회 간사님 감사합니다. 그리고 아멜리아 젤리 멀리 그 2세 유대인과 한국 어머니의 2세인데요. 이번에 북한 독기 운동 도움까지 주신 우리 하영이 아주 감사합니다. Thank you so much for your help. 그리고 힐러리원 선생님 감사하고요. 박미정 선생님, 샌프란시스코 코인 전 회장님 감사하고요. 우리 소병성 LA 평통회장님 감사하고요. 그리고 린다모 선생님 감사하고요. 그리고 우리 제니니 선생님 감사합니다. 그리고 우리 김용훈 선생님 감사하고요. 제가 다 이렇게 아이디를 몰라서 이렇게 그 아이디 처리가 잘 안 된 건 제가 다 말씀을 못 드리고 제가 오늘 인식한 특별히 나가셨지만 분들을 소개해 드리겠습니다. 먼저 조엔 유엔 대사님께서 잠시 참석하셨었습니다. 감사합니다. 권세중 그 워싱턴 DC 총영사님이 참석하셨습니다. 염홍철 전 대전시장님이 참석하셨고요. 조성열 Senior Researcher of National Security Strategy Institute Korea 조성열 박사님께서 참석하셨고요. 그리고 마크장 메릴랜드 주 델리깃 그 주 하원의원이 참석하셨었습니다. 그리고 아담 스캇 Chief of Staff 브레이 셔먼 의원의 Chief of Staff이 참여하셨고요. 그리고 영국에서 이윤정 교수님이 참여하셨습니다. 그 중국 청도에서 설규정 평통회장님이 참석하셨고요. 오늘 평통회장님 중에서는 정승덕 전 샌프란시스코 회장님, 에드워드 LA 평통회장님, 최성호 샌프란시스코 회장님, 한선우 보스턴 회장님, 박유원 휴스턴 회장님 등이 참석하셨습니다. 그리고 멀리 그 전에 청와대 중요한 안보 비서관 했던 분인데 안병진 교수님께서 또 참석하셔서 마지막까지 있다 가셨고요. 또 윌슨 센터 싱크탱크 윌슨 센터에서 박수진 그 수석 연구원이 참석하셨었습니다. 제가 혹시라도 다 레코그니션을 못했다면 죄송하고요. 이상으로서 모든 행사를 마치고 Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining tonight. Thanks so much for Congressman Sherman and distinguished guests for the wonderful speech and questions and answers. And I hope all is well for you and your race for the House Foreign Affairs able, and I believe you will be there. Thank you, folks. Please stay safe and healthy. Wear a mask. Keep social distancing. Please hang in there so we can see you all next week. Same time, next week, and the after next week, the following week, the same time. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Just one last reminder. 미국 인구 조사. We have to do, if you have not done so already, please do the census. Our Korean community depends on you doing the census for our own resources. So please, if you have not done so already, for those in the United States, I just put the link. Please do the census.
All right, good call. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend. Thank you, everybody.